Amanda didn't sleep that night. She spent the hours on high alert, checking windows and doors with Luca in her arms. Near dawn, an unmarked police car arrived to assist with the surveillance. Detective Antonio had sent one of his trusted agents to bolster their security, and Amanda felt a slight relief, even though she knew nothing would allow her to rest completely until Luca was far from danger. That morning, Carla, the social worker, arrived early with updates about Luca's situation. With a worried expression, she entered the room where Amanda was with the baby. "Amanda, we found a distant aunt of Luca's. She lives in the Netherlands and is the only legally registered relative, but, well, her situation doesn't seem ideal for taking in a baby, and she herself seems hesitant about custody," she explained, her face serious. "In any case, we'll have to wait to understand the next steps." Amanda felt a mix of emotions. Part of her feared that Luca would be taken far away, but another part worried that if he stayed, he would be under constant threat. She was interrupted by a notification on her phone, a message from Antonio. The content was alarming. "We confirmed that the men who were in the car last night are associated with the group investigated by Luca's father. I need you to prepare for a possible immediate departure." Amanda's heart raced. She knew the situation had become more dangerous and, at the same time, more urgent. Carla, noticing the tension on Amanda's face, asked, "Is everything okay?" Amanda took a deep breath and decided not to hide the gravity of the situation. "Carla, I think we're under surveillance by a dangerous group. Luca's parents were investigating something very serious, and there are people looking for him. I don't know how much longer I can keep him safe here." The social worker fell silent for a moment, absorbing the information. Finally, she nodded. "Amanda, if you feel there's no longer safety, I trust your judgment. Maybe we should arrange for a safe location, or perhaps a secluded place for a while." Amanda didn't hesitate. She packed some clothes and the essentials for Luca into a backpack. She needed to take him somewhere they couldn't be found, at least until Antonio and the team could dismantle the criminal group. With Luca in her arms and Carla by her side, Amanda got into her car. Their destination was a remote cabin in an isolated area of the city, where she had spent a few vacation days months earlier. She felt safer there and knew she could stay off the radar. As she drove along the winding roads leading to the cabin, Amanda glanced at Luca in the rearview mirror, increasingly aware that he was already a definitive part of her life. All she knew was that she wouldn't give up, no matter how dangerous things became. When they finally arrived at the cabin, a small house surrounded by trees, Amanda got out of the car and took a deep breath, savoring the fresh morning air. It felt like a sanctuary, and she clung to the idea that for a brief time, they would be safe. But as she approached the door with Luca in her arms, a noise from the nearby trees caught her attention. Someone was there. Instinctively, she hugged Luca close, trying to think quickly. Amanda froze upon hearing footsteps approaching through the trees. Instinctively, she stepped back into the cabin, closing the door with one hand while holding Luca tightly against her chest. The baby began to squirm, sensing the tension in the air. She knew she had little time before those men tried to force their way in. Amanda's phone vibrated. It was a message from Antonio. "We're on our way, but it'll take a few minutes. Hold tight and stay calm." Taking a deep breath, Amanda looked around and grabbed a piece of wood leaning against the fireplace. She needed to protect Luca at all costs. Her mind raced with all the possibilities, but there was only one certainty. She wouldn't let anything happen to him. Suddenly, the doorknob began to turn slowly, and Amanda braced herself. The first man forced the door, but Amanda was ready. With a swift and precise strike, she hit him on the arm, causing him to stumble back with a scream. Before he could react, she shoved a chair against the door, trying to buy herself precious seconds. "Leave the baby. We only want what his parents had," shouted the man outside, his voice filled with desperation. Amanda responded in a firm voice. "You're not getting near him. Can you hear me? No matter what you're looking for, he's out of your reach." The response was the sound of footsteps approaching again, stronger and more determined. Amanda knew her time was running out. In her heart, a mix of fear and courage pushed her to keep fighting. Luca, in her arms, started to cry, and she whispered, "Sure, it's going to be okay, Luca. It's going to be okay." But just before they could force the door again, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder. Antonio and his team were arriving quickly, and the men realized their time was running out, too. Within seconds, hurried footsteps and the crunching of leaves could be heard as the intruders fled into the woods. Amanda carefully opened the door, stepping out with Luca still in her arms as the police cars arrived at the cabin. Antonio jumped out of the car, rushing toward her, his look of concern transforming into relief upon seeing her. "Amanda, are you okay?" "And Luca?" he asked, assessing the situation. "We're fine, Antonio. That was close, but we're fine." She looked at Luca, who was watching her with his big, innocent eyes, as if he knew the danger had passed. In that moment, she felt a wave of relief mixed with sadness. She knew Luca was safe, but the battle for his custody was just beginning. In the following weeks, the investigation unveiled the criminal scheme of the group that had pursued Luca's parents, and the Dutch government provided security and a new home for him with a caring family. With a heavy heart, Amanda had to say goodbye, knowing he would finally have a safe life. But as she gave Luca one last hug, she silently promised him that she would always cherish his memories as part of herself. As she watched Luca being taken away, Amanda felt that, however brief it had been, the experience had changed her life forever. The first nights in the orphanage were tough. Zack slept curled up, as if he were ready to run at any moment. The bed was soft, unlike the floor of the shop where he sometimes fell asleep among tools and boxes of parts. The other boys in the orphanage kept their distance, watching him with a mix of curiosity and wariness. Zack was quiet, reserved, and had sad eyes. He wasn't easy to approach. The only person who seemed unwilling to give up on Zack was a social worker named Clara. She visited him every day, brought storybooks, and tried to talk to him about how he was feeling, but the boy only listened in silence, staring at the floor. During one of these visits, Clara noticed his interest as he flipped through a book with pictures of cars. He ran his fingers over the images as if he knew each part of that machine. "Do you like cars, Zack?" she asked with a gentle smile. He nodded slowly, a faint spark appearing in his eyes. It was as if, for the first time, someone was asking about something that truly mattered to him. "I know how to work on them. My grandpa taught me," he murmured, his voice trembling, yet with a touch of pride. Clara saw a glimmer of hope. She began to encourage his interest in mechanics, bringing him magazines, illustrated books, and even some simple tools he could use in the orphanage's yard. The other kids watched with curiosity, but now Zack seemed to be in another world, focused on each part, on every detail. A few weeks later, during a meeting at the orphanage, a family came in for the first time, interested in meeting Zack. They were a young couple, Clara and Eduardo, who had always dreamed of having children but couldn't due to health reasons. Zack, however, remained quiet throughout the meeting, answering only with monosyllables and avoiding eye contact. Yet Clara and Eduardo saw something beyond his reluctance. They saw the intelligence and resilience of a boy who had endured harsh trials. After several visits and a lot of patience, the couple managed to carve out a small place in Zack's heart. They took him home for the first time on a sunny weekend, and he could hardly believe what he saw. The house was simple but cozy. Zack had a room all to himself, something he had never thought possible. There were toys, books, and a bicycle that Eduardo had bought especially for him. Eduardo also had an old car in the garage, an unfinished project he had always wanted to restore but never found the time for. Noticing Zack's curious gaze at the car, he offered, "Want to help me with it some days?" Zack hesitated, but Eduardo's enthusiastic look was different from his grandfather's. There were no demands, no threats, just an invitation. And so, on the first weekend Zack spent with his new family, he felt he could finally be himself, without fear. The first challenge came a few days later. The family decided to take a trip to a nearby town, and halfway there, the car started having issues. Clara and Eduardo exchanged worried glances, trying to figure out what was wrong. But Zack, sitting in the back seat, listened carefully to the engine with intense concentration. "It's making a strange noise, like there's a loose part up front," he said, surprising everyone with his precise observation. Eduardo, not sure what to think, let out a nervous laugh. "Well, you seem to know what you're talking about, kid." Zack then asked to get out of the car. He walked over to the hood, which Eduardo opened, still somewhat skeptical, but curious to see what the boy would do. Zack looked at the engine carefully, adjusted a few parts, and with a confidence no one expected, announced, "It'll work now." Eduardo looked at Clara, who seemed as surprised as he was, but when he turned the key, the engine started smoothly, without the strange noise. Everyone fell silent, until Eduardo smiled and gave Zack a light tap on the shoulder. "I don't know how you did that, but you're a real mechanical genius." For the first time in a long while, Zack smiled with pride. In that moment, he began to realize that his life was changing and that, maybe, he had finally found a place where he belonged. From that day on, Zack began to feel more comfortable with Clara and Eduardo. He no longer moved quietly around the house on light footsteps, as if he were always hiding. The boy now explored every room, felt safe to play, and even tried to get closer to the other kids in the neighborhood. But above all, he spent hours in the garage with Eduardo, helping him fix the old car. Eduardo, increasingly impressed, talked with Clara about their adoptive son's uncommon talent. "It's amazing. He seems to understand mechanics like someone much older," he remarked, a proud gleam in his eyes. One afternoon, after returning from a trip downtown, Eduardo surprised Zack with a special gift. Opening the garage door, he revealed a small workbench equipped with various new tools, all smaller in size, perfect for Zack's hands. The boy looked at the bench and then at Eduardo, unsure if it was real. "Is this for me?" he asked, almost in a whisper. Eduardo nodded with a smile. "Yes, Zack. Now you have your own tools. I know it's something you enjoy doing, so I thought it would be nice for you to have your own little space here." Zack was silent for a moment, but then, on impulse, he hugged Eduardo. It was a timid gesture, but filled with gratitude. Eduardo returned the hug, feeling a lump in his throat. Zack was slowly finding his place in the world, and Eduardo knew how much that moment meant. At school, however, things were more complicated. Some classmates still avoided him, and a few older boys mocked his simple clothes and introspective manner. But Ms. Mariana, his teacher, remained a supportive figure. She noticed Zack's progress and kept encouraging him. One day, she called him after class and handed him a flyer announcing a science fair that would be held at the school. "Zack, have you thought about participating in the science fair? I know you have an incredible talent for mechanics and cars. I think you could create something really special." He looked at the flyer apprehensively, still doubting that he could do something important. "But, teacher, what if I mess up? What if no one likes it?" he asked, revealing his insecurities. Ms. Mariana smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "The important thing is to try, Zack. And I know you're very good. Believe in yourself." He took the flyer home and showed it to Eduardo and Clara, who were excited about the idea. Eduardo helped him plan a project that demonstrated the basic workings of an engine, and for weeks, they worked together, assembling and disassembling parts. Zack dedicated himself wholeheartedly, sometimes losing track of time while working on the project. His passion for mechanics was a kind of refuge, a place where he felt capable and in control. When the day of the fair arrived, Zack was nervous. The school auditorium was filled with decorated tables, with children of all ages showcasing their creations. There were chemistry experiments, robotics projects, and models of solar systems. He adjusted the glasses and the cap that Eduardo had given him, trying to hide his nervousness. Ms. Mariana approached, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I bet you're going to surprise everyone, Zack," she said with a smile. When it was his turn to present his project, Zack explained each part of the engine, demonstrating how the car converted fuel into motion. He spoke with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone, especially Clara and Eduardo, who watched from a distance, emotional. The judges, impressed by the precision of his explanations and the boy's confidence, congratulated him and asked where he had learned so much about the subject. Zack hesitated for a moment, remembering his grandfather and the long hours spent in the workshop. He then took a deep breath and answered sincerely, "I learned from my grandfather, but today I have a new family that helps me keep learning." The auditorium fell silent for a moment, and Zack realized that, for the first time, talking about the past didn't hurt as much. He was freeing himself from the ghosts of his history, and at that moment, he felt stronger. At the end of the event, the school awarded the best projects, and Zack was called to the stage to receive second place. The smile on his face was so genuine and unexpected that Eduardo and Clara could hardly contain themselves, applauding with all their might. "Congratulations, champ," Eduardo said, hugging him. Clara, moved, wiped away tears as she looked at her son. That night, back home, Zack placed the trophy next to his tools and stared at it for a long time. It was a small victory, but to him, it meant a world of possibilities. The following months were a period of discovery for Zack. Each day with Clara and Eduardo brought a new lesson, and he gradually felt the weight of his past begin to lift. The house that once seemed strange now felt like home. He loved the smell of the bread Clara baked on Sundays and the conversations he had with Eduardo in the garage, where they spent hours dismantling and reassembling the old car. At school, Zack continued to face challenges, especially with some classmates who kept mocking him, calling him weird kid or shop nerd. Although the words still stung, he now had a refuge. He knew that when he got home, Clara would greet him with a smile, and Eduardo would have a friendly joke waiting for him. One day, after an especially tiring class, Ms. Mariana pulled him aside for a chat. "Zack, the school is starting a mentorship program for students with specific talents. I spoke with the administration and suggested your name to join the mechanics and electrical engineering group. Would you be interested?" Zack was silent for a moment, absorbing the news. It was hard for him to imagine that his talent could be valuable enough to earn special attention. He remembered his grandfather's harsh words, making him feel constantly inadequate, as if every mistake was proof of his failure. But here, standing in front of Ms. Mariana, he felt different, appreciated. He looked up at his teacher and, in a quiet voice, said, I would like that, ma'am." Starting the following week, Zack joined the mentorship program, an activity held every Tuesday afternoon after classes. The group was small, made up of a few older students, and was led by a retired engineer, Mr. Alfredo. He was an elderly man, but his gaze carried a contagious energy. Zack watched him with admiration. There was something in the way Mr. Alfredo explained each concept, each engine part, that made everything seem simple. In no time, Mr. Alfredo noticed Zack's natural ability and began to give him increasingly complex challenges. While the other students were amazed at how easily he solved problems, Zack remained focused, losing himself in the world of engines and gears. One day, Mr. Alfredo called him aside and handed him an advanced mechanics book. It was a thick book, full of diagrams and detailed explanations. "This was my favorite book when I was young," the mentor said, a sparkle in his eyes. "I think it'll help you understand even more about what we're working on." Zack held the book carefully, as if it were a precious treasure. "Thank you, sir," he murmured, barely able to believe the gift. He spent nights reading every page, studying each diagram intently. His fascination with mechanics grew day by day. Meanwhile, Clara and Eduardo watched with joy as he transformed. Zack was no longer the withdrawn, wary boy they had brought home. Now, he ran around the house, laughed at silly jokes, and even tried to teach Clara how to identify engine parts, something she pretended to understand just to see him excited. However, despite all this happiness, Zack still carried a shadow in his heart, the memory of his grandfather. On some nights, he would dream of the workshop, the sound of bottles breaking, and the shouts of the man who had raised him. On one of those nights, he woke up startled, his heart racing, and saw Eduardo standing in the doorway of his room. "Are you okay, Zack?" Eduardo asked, looking concerned. Zack nodded, trying to hide his fear. But in that moment, something inside him gave way. He could no longer keep those memories to himself. He sat on the bed and began to talk, telling Eduardo about his grandfather, the workshop, the exhausting work, and the constant fear. Eduardo listened silently, without interrupting. When Zack finished, tears filled the boy's eyes and he lowered his head, feeling vulnerable. Eduardo came closer, kneeling beside the bed, and placed a hand on his shoulder. Zack, I know nothing you went through was easy, and you were very brave to face it all. But now, you don't have to carry that weight alone. Clara and I are here for you, and we always will be. Zack felt an immense relief hearing those words. It was as if, finally, he could breathe without fear. That night, he slept deeply, with the certainty that he now had a family who truly supported him. A few months later, an even greater surprise was in store. Mr. Alfredo called Zack for a conversation after one of their mentorship sessions. He mentioned a special event in a nearby town, a young talents competition in automotive mechanics. It was a big event, and Zack had been invited to participate. The news caused a stir at home. Clara and Eduardo were thrilled and immediately began organizing everything to ensure Zack could compete. They bought new tools and helped him prepare for each stage of the competition. Zack, with the support of his parents and Mr. Alfredo, dedicated himself wholeheartedly, dreaming of the day he could show what he knew. When the competition day arrived, Zack felt nervous, but also excited. He had never participated in anything like this before, and though he was still just a boy, he knew this was his chance to prove to himself that he could go beyond everything he had lived through in the past. Zack was about to discover just how far his talent could take him. The big day of the competition finally arrived. The event took place in a convention center, and Zack was dazzled by the size of the place. There were dozens of teams, young people of various ages wearing uniforms and badges, and a huge hall filled with engines, parts, and tools he had never seen in person. Zack stood frozen, taking it all in with wide eyes, while Clara and Eduardo encouraged him. "You're going to crush it, champ," Eduardo said, giving him a firm handshake. Smiling, Clara knelt down to his level and whispered, "Don't worry about the outcome. Have fun and show them what you know, okay?" Zack nodded, taking a deep breath. He knew that to get here, he had faced things most of the other participants could never even imagine. With that thought, he headed to his workstation, where the engine he needed to repair and diagnose was already set up for the competition. The event began with a sound signal, and Zack immediately focused. He examined the engine carefully, his thin, skilled fingers identifying each screw, valve, and wire. He was the youngest competitor, and some of the judges watched him with a bit of skepticism. An 8-year-old boy working on such a complex engine seemed unlikely. But as time passed, their expressions shifted from doubt to admiration. Zack quickly identified the engine's issues, diagnosing an ignition system failure and a loose connection affecting fuel flow. He knew exactly what to do and started dismantling the parts with precision. Other competitors watched curiously, realizing that despite his age, he had undeniable skill. Zack was so focused that he barely noticed the crowd forming around his workstation. Clara and Eduardo, watching from a distance, could hardly contain their pride. They had never seen Zack so focused, so confident. Clara held Eduardo's hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "Look at him, it's like he was born to do this," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. When the event ended, Zack had finished his repair minutes before the time ran out. He started the engine, which purred smoothly, to the judges' and audience's amazement. One of the judges, a seasoned mechanic with years of experience, approached Zack and shook his hand firmly. "You're an impressive young man, Zack. What you did here today, well, I've never seen anything like it." Zack smiled shyly, feeling truly recognized for what he did best. During the awards ceremony, he was called to the stage as the event's breakout competitor. As he received the trophy, he looked into the crowd and found Clara and Eduardo's smiling faces. They were standing, applauding him with pride. On the way home, Zack held onto the trophy for the entire trip, as if it symbolized something far greater than just a win. He now understood that he could overcome the difficulties of his past, that his talent could take him far, and that he had a family who supported him unconditionally. For a boy who had been taught to live in fear and hide, that trophy represented freedom. A few days later, back at school, Zack was surprised when some classmates who used to avoid him approached. Some wanted to hear about the competition, and others simply wanted to congratulate him. For the first time, he felt accepted. There were still a few who mocked him, but now Zack didn't let it bother him. He had newfound confidence and knew he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. One day, after class, Ms. Mariana called Zack over for a talk. She handed him an envelope and smiled. "Zack, you received a special invitation to participate in a young talent program in engineering in the capital. They heard about your performance at the competition and want you to attend an event with other young people from across the country. It's an incredible opportunity." Zack looked at the envelope, hardly able to believe it. It was as if all his dreams were coming true at once. He ran home and told Clara and Eduardo the news, and they were even more excited than he was. They immediately began planning everything so he could attend the event. A few weeks later, Zack and his family boarded a bus bound for the capital. The boy was nervous, but the constant support from Clara and Eduardo made him feel stronger. When they arrived at the event venue, Zack could hardly believe the grandeur of the place. It was an enormous convention center filled with talented young people, renowned engineers, and countless modern pieces of equipment. The program would last 3 days, with Zack participating in workshops, lectures, and a team competition on the final day. He felt challenged, but also motivated. During the first few days, he made new friends, meeting other young people who were also passionate about mechanics and engineering. It was there he realized how valuable his knowledge was and how much he could learn from others. On the last day of the event, during the team competition, Zack encountered a technical difficulty with the engine they were working on. His team was about to lose points, but he quickly identified the problem and guided his teammates in fixing it, impressing even the event organizers. His performance was so remarkable that, at the end of the competition, the judges called Zack to the stage and honored him, recognizing his talent and leadership. Overcome with emotion, Zack held the microphone and thanked everyone. He looked at Clara and Eduardo, who were in the audience, and said, "I'm grateful to my family, who believed in me and showed me that I can have a different future." Returning home, Zack was more confident than ever. He knew that this event was just the beginning of something much bigger, and that, with Clara and Eduardo's support, he was ready to face any challenge. Zack's return to town after the event marked a profound transformation. He was no longer the boy haunted by the past, insecure and shy. Every step he took, every new experience and challenge he overcame, helped him build a confidence that seemed unshakable. For Clara and Eduardo, it was moving to watch him blossom. At school, even his teachers began to notice the change. Zack participated enthusiastically in class, his grades improved, and he showed a natural curiosity to learn more about the world around him. One day, during a school meeting, Ms. Mariana called Clara and Eduardo aside for a chat. "Zack is truly an extraordinary boy. He has an impressive knack for learning, and I think he could benefit greatly from an advanced studies program. Have you ever considered that?" Clara and Eduardo exchanged surprised glances. While they knew Zack was talented, they hadn't imagined he could go so far so quickly. They went home excited, and that night, during dinner, they shared the news with Zack. "Zack, your teacher thinks you should join an advanced studies program," Clara said with a smile. "Are you interested?" Zack stopped chewing and looked at his parents, his eyes shining with excitement and doubt. "But isn't that for really smart kids?" he asked, still unsure. Eduardo chuckled and ruffled his hair. "And who says you're not, champ? You're the smartest kid I know. Let's think it over together and see what we decide, okay?" Days passed, and the idea of joining the advanced studies program grew in Zack's heart. He no longer felt like the vulnerable, lost boy he once was. He knew he could achieve great things. With Clara and Eduardo's support, he decided to apply, and a few weeks later, he received the news that he had been accepted. The program would take place at a technical school in a nearby town, and he would have to travel twice a week for classes. For Zack, it felt like living a dream he'd never thought possible. On his first day in the program, Zack was nervous, but his excitement outweighed it. The technical school was a fascinating place, with modern labs, machines he'd only seen in books, and other students who shared his passion for technology. The teachers welcomed him warmly, impressed by the young boy's background. Zack quickly stood out, showing practical knowledge that surprised even older students. One of the teachers, Mr. Fonseca, noticed Zack's potential and started encouraging him to take on even more complex technical challenges. "You have a natural talent, Zack. Would you like to work on a special project with me?" Zack immediately agreed. The project was ambitious, building a functional model of an electric engine, something that would require not only knowledge but also dedication and creativity. For weeks, Zack and Mr. Fonseca worked side by side, and each day taught him something new about engineering and technology. Eduardo would drive Zack to the technical school and spend hours waiting while he finished his classes, always happy to support his son in his new project. One Saturday afternoon, while Zack was at home working on the project, he received an unexpected visitor. Ms. Mariana had decided to stop by to check on his progress. She looked around the garage, admiring the tools, the organized parts, and, most of all, the skilled way Zack handled each one. "Zack, you're truly incredible," she said, with genuine pride. "Not everyone can do what you do." Zack looked at his teacher with a shy smile, feeling grateful. "I just really enjoy this, ma'am. When I'm here, I feel like I can truly be myself." Ms. Mariana nodded, understanding what he meant. She had watched his journey from the beginning and knew how much this boy had overcome to get where he was. Before leaving, she hugged him, wishing him even more success on his path. Time passed, and the electric engine Zack had been working on with Mr. Fonseca was finally completed. They had created a prototype that ran on a clean energy system, an innovative concept for a school project. On the day of the presentation, several school directors, students, and even community members gathered to see Zack's work. When he started the engine and explained its operation with impressive clarity, the audience applauded enthusiastically. The technical school's principal approached him and, visibly moved, said, "Zack, you're not just a talented student. You're the kind of mind our country needs. Don't ever stop pursuing your dreams." Zack left that event with a sense of accomplishment he had never felt before. It was as if all the struggles of his past had been merely the prelude to something greater. That night, he and his family celebrated his achievement with a special dinner, where Clara and Eduardo prepared his favorite dishes and reminisced about the moments they'd shared so far. Later, lying in bed, Zack reflected on everything that had happened since he'd left his grandfather's workshop. He now had a family who loved him, friends who respected him, and a future full of possibilities. For the first time, he felt the world was within his reach. But deep down, a worry lingered. He still wondered what the future held and whether the scars of his past would ever fully fade. Even with all he had achieved, Zack knew his story was far from over. The months following the electric motor presentation brought even more opportunities for Zack. The story of his project began to circulate around town and even reached the local press. Zack was interviewed by a newspaper, which highlighted his early talent and the unwavering support of Clara and Eduardo. For the boy who once lived in silence, hidden from other children, it was almost unbelievable. Meanwhile, Clara and Eduardo became increasingly focused on ensuring a solid future for Zack. Both enrolled in courses on parenting and emotional support, concerned about how they could help him face the lingering trauma from his past. They knew that, even though Zack was excelling, he still carried deep scars from the difficult years with his grandfather. One night, while Clara was going through some paperwork at the kitchen table, she came across Zack's adoption records. She flipped through the pages, stopping at an old photo taken shortly after he was placed in the orphanage. The boy in the photo was unrecognizable, pale, thin, with lifeless eyes, lacking the sparkle that now shone in his gaze. Clara felt a pang in her chest and approached Eduardo, showing him the photo. "Look at how he was so small, so vulnerable," Clara said, her voice trembling. Eduardo sighed, looking at the image of the boy who is now their son. "He's strong, Clara. Zack faced things that many adults wouldn't be able to endure, and he's turning that into strength. But maybe it's time we talk to him about how he feels. We need him to know we're ready to listen, no matter what." They agreed it was important to help Zack open up about the scars of his past. That night, while he was working on a project in the garage, Clara went out and called him for a talk. Zack, do you have a minute? Your dad, and I would like to talk to you, she said, with a gentle smile. Zack looked curious, but put down his tools and followed his mom into the living room. Eduardo was waiting on the sofa, and they invited him to sit between them. It was rare for them to have serious conversations, and Zack sensed a different tone in the air. Zack, Eduardo began, we're very proud of you. We see how hard you've been working, how much you've overcome, and how well you're doing. But we also know you went through a lot before you came here, and maybe some of those things still hurt. Clara held Zack's hand, her gaze calm and comforting. We want you to know that we're here for everything, Zack. If you ever want to talk about the past, about your grandfather, or anything that bothers you, we're here to listen. We don't need to talk about it right now, but we want you to know we're ready whenever you are. Zack looked at his parents, feeling a tightness in his chest. He knew this was a chance to open up, to share the burden he'd been carrying alone. He took a deep breath, hesitating, but the words began to escape almost on their own. I was always scared, he confessed, lowering his gaze. Scared that if I made a mistake, he'd get mad. Grandpa would say I'd never be good at anything. And sometimes I still feel like I have to be perfect, that I can't mess up. Eduardo placed a gentle hand on Zack's shoulder, speaking softly. You never have to be perfect, Zack. No one does. Making mistakes is part of learning. And know that if you stumble, we'll be here to help you get back up. Clara wiped a tear, moved by her son's words. You're an amazing person, Zack. Everything you've accomplished is because of your own merit, and we couldn't be prouder of you, just as you are. That night, Zack slept with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if, by talking about his fears and painful memories, he was freeing himself from the invisible chains that bound him. He knew that his parents' unconditional support gave him the strength to face any difficulty that might still come. A few days later, during a meeting of the Advanced Studies program, Zack received surprising news. The technical school's director called him into the conference room, where teachers, classmates, and Mr. Fonseca were present. With a smile, the director announced, Zack, we heard that a tech company in the capital is interested in offering you a scholarship. They want you to participate in a special training program for talented young people. It's a unique opportunity. Zack was stunned, speechless. Mr. Fonseca, emotional, gave him a gentle pat on the back. You deserve this, Zack. I've never met a young man as dedicated as you. With the news, Clara and Eduardo immediately began arranging the details for his trip to the capital. The program would last 2 months, over the school break, and Zack would stay with other students in a dormitory. For Zack, it was an experience that was both exciting and a little daunting, but he knew his parents would only be a phone call away. When the day of the trip arrived, Zack hugged Clara and Eduardo tightly, promising to give it his all. In the big city, he found a whole new world. Modern labs, experienced teachers, and young people with dreams and skills as remarkable as his own. Zack excelled in every activity, absorbing everything he could learn. He was one of the youngest in the group, but his passion and dedication earned him everyone's respect. At the end of the program, during a closing ceremony, Zack was called up to the stage to receive a special award. The director of the company sponsoring the program made a point to congratulate him personally. Zack, you have a rare talent, and everyone here has seen your potential. When you're ready, the doors of our company will be open for you, he said, shaking the boy's hand, who couldn't hide his pride. On the bus ride home, Zack gazed out the window, reflecting on everything he had experienced so far. He felt ready for the challenges ahead. He knew he could rely on Clara and Eduardo, and, above all, he knew he had a bright future. As he stepped off the bus, he saw his parents waiting for him with eager smiles. Zack ran to meet them, and as he hugged them, he realized that, despite all the amazing places he had visited, none was as special as his home. The following months were intense for Zack, who was now known throughout the community as a mechanical prodigy. His unexpected fame brought new opportunities, and he began receiving invitations to events, school lectures, and even technology fairs, where he shared his inventions and knowledge. Whenever someone asked about his journey, Zack made sure to mention Clara and Eduardo, who had rescued him from darkness and believed in him from day one. One day, however, when Zack came home from school, he found Clara and Eduardo sitting in the living room, looking tense. "Zack, we need to talk about something important," Clara said, with a worried look. Zack was silent for a long time, lost in thought. Finally, he took a deep breath and said, hesitantly, "I want to go. I think I need to see him to understand a few things." The next day, Clara and Eduardo accompanied him to the hospital. Zack felt a mixture of nervousness and resolve. When he entered the room where his grandfather lay, he saw a frail man with a pale face and hollow eyes. His grandfather looked like a shadow of the threatening man he remembered. Romulo slowly opened his eyes upon noticing Zack's presence. "Zack," the man murmured, his voice hoarse. I've heard about you. They say you've become a mechanical genius." Zack nodded, keeping a serious expression. He didn't know how to feel seeing him in this state. Part of him wanted to feel pity, but another part still remembered the pain, the yelling, and the lonely nights in the workshop. Romulo breathed heavily and said, "I did so much wrong by you. My father was cruel to me, and I ended up doing the same to you. I don't know how, but if you can, forgive me. I just wanted you to be strong." Zack listened in silence, feeling a strange mixture of anger and compassion. He knew he would never forget the wounds he carried, but at that moment, he realized he didn't need hatred to move forward. "I forgive you, Grandpa," Zack said, with surprising calm. "But now I have a family who loves me and shows me that being strong is about being someone people can trust and love. I hope you find peace, somehow." Romulo nodded, tears in his eyes, and before Zack left, he murmured a barely audible thank you. Clara and Eduardo waited for him in the hallway, and when Zack stepped out of the room, he felt as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. On the way back, he was silent, gazing out the car window. Eduardo held his hand and asked, "How do you feel, son?" Zack took a deep breath, as if breathing for the first time. "I feel free." Months passed, and Zack continued to pursue his dreams. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer ruled him. He was accepted into a prestigious technical school, where he had access to cutting-edge labs and teachers, something that once seemed impossible. Gradually, he began to plan his future, dreaming of building machines that could help people and make life easier for those in need. A few years later, Zack became a promising young engineer, known for his innovation and passion for mechanics. With every achievement, he carried the memory of those who had helped him transform his story. And in a special moment, while receiving an award at a national event, he made sure to step onto the stage with Clara and Eduardo by his side. "This award is for my parents, Clara and Eduardo, who gave me a second chance, taught me what love is, and showed me that the past doesn't define who we are. With them, I learned that we can turn any pain into strength." The audience gave a standing ovation, and Clara and Eduardo couldn't hold back their tears of pride. Zack had finally found his place in the world. He knew that his story was, in truth, a story of love, resilience, and a family who, against all odds, helped him become who he was. And so, Zack continued his journey, knowing he would never be alone and that, with courage and love, he could face any challenge the future held for him.